rise up in the morning beneath the stars so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. You'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Burning daylight. Well, life is just a gather, and you won't catch 'em all. But when you ride through the gate, make sure you sit up tall. I can see the horizon, it's looking pretty bright. Well, get your ass moving, son, you're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight.
So they were basically forced to indoctrinate and inculcate into, Western civilization, if you will. A lot of them were what they call whitewashing. The ones my grandparents went to were they were Catholic in Colorado. So they were Mexican based. They're Spanish based. So my grandparents, they both, on both sides of my mother's family, changed their last name to Hispanic last names. And then basically just kind of, because the way they look, they kind of inculcated it into the Mexican American culture. Okay. So my mother was raised more of like a Mexican American woman. But then when she was, where she's from, where she grew up in San Diego County in Julian, it's kind of surrounded by a lot of Indian reservations. Mm-hmm. So she ran with a lot of Native women and Native friends, growing up as a kid. But just always kind of thought she was Mexican until her mother, when she was older, started talking more about it. And then she was like 18 or 19, she moved to Montana. And while she lived in Montana, she was adopted into the Assiniboine tribe. So everything I know that's as far as culture, traditions, things like that, it's all Assiniboine. So kind of a long way of saying, a lot of Native people actually go through this, especially families like mine. And then my dad's just a cowboy from Montana, so really cool background and very a lot of culture there for me, as a kid, and even as an adult now, kind of having that Mexican vaquero style of like upbringing mixed with a very traditional kind of warrior culture of the Assiniboine tribe. So.
Yeah. So, and Assiniboine, is that one of the Plains Indian tribes?
Yes. Yeah.
So
we live.
Mounted tribe, basically hunter warrior cult. Yeah.
Yeah. They're basically one of the tribes that, followed the buffalo around. And then where we grew up in Montana, lived in Havre for a while, or right outside Havre. So all those Indian reservations that are up kind of in the plains of Montana is where the Assiniboine people are originally from, and then up into Canada as well. So there's another band that lives on the, I don't know what I forget. They don't call them reservations in Canada. They call them something else, but on Indian reservations in Canada as well.
Yeah. Okay. So I when I was up in Montana, I was over at Big Sandy, and and so I remember that Havre was the closest town with with most of the stuff you needed. So that's where we went. And yeah, there's that big casino right on the highway there on the on the south side of the highway, and that's kind of the entrance of the res. And I wasn't up there long enough to get to know any of those, but there's quite a few reservations out here around where I'm at, and a lot of native cowboys, and they're all buckaroo
Yeah.
style, and yeah, it's kind of and there's it's funny how there's some tribes that took to the horse like it was like the missing the Comanche always they were kind of short, stocky, kind of just not real great on their feet, but like you put them on a horse and they were the best of the best. And it was just like there was, I forget which chief it was, but they said that like the horse was like the missing part of the native soul, the Comanche's soul. And it just like from there it was like game on. They were kind of a struggling tribe until they mastered the horse, and then the Comanche ruled the most of the Great Plains for hundreds of years.
Yeah, where I guide at a lot and outfit a lot in the Wind River Range is what we call sheep eater country. So the sheep eater people, basically like a band of the sheep eaters came out of the Wind Rivers and like the Teton area and went straight into the plains and found the horse, and that was the Comanche. So that's why they were built this little short, stocky kind of mountain goat style of person, because that's what they did. They chased goats, and they were just amazing in the mountains. And then they came to the horse and just became this, horse people. And something that like is kind of cool when you talk about the Comanche, I think it's easier to, all tribes did this, but it's the Comanche were kind of known for it, and you can find it a little bit more in history books and whatnot with them. But they adopted a lot of people. And one of the ways that they became really strong was because they didn't, when you look at the colors of the medicine wheel, what it represents a lot of things. One of the biggest things it represents is all the colors of the people of the world. Mm. So the Comanche were really known for just adopting people, or whether it's through raiding, they would take kids, women, and children, and they would just basically raise them as Comanche. So a lot of people that were Comanche, how they got so strong, they weren't necessarily Comanche by blood. They might have been another type of native, or white, or black, or mixed, or Mexican, whatever. And they basically just treated them as Comanche, and they lived as Comanche. So that was one of the ways that they became really strong and powerful, as a tribe, because they were willing to do that, where some other tribes didn't really raid and do the same things as far as trying to get women and children to actually grow their tribe.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I mean, like Cynthia Ann Parker was like,
right,
she was
correct, and that's what I mean.
Yeah,
you can find it in history books pretty easy.
Yeah, as a slave, but like they eventually adopted her into the tribe, and
she married a chief.
Yeah, and then her son Quanah Parker, who's a half breed, becomes like the most well known Comanche chief of all. It's And through circumstance and the time, of course, that's how he got his, helped get his fame, but also because he was, I mean, the last of the last Indians fighting at the time,
and that territory in Oklahoma territory, and the Comanche really made and especially where they were at in Texas, and then once you had the kind of the advent of the Texas Rangers, I think a lot of times what we tend to do, just in general, it's not just an American thing, it's just how the world works, is if you look at indigenous cultures around the planet, a lot of times their story isn't told correctly, or it's not believed until recently. We're finding a lot of evidence, archaeological evidence, to basically back what indigenous people around the world have been saying for centuries. So a lot of this, when you look at history, it's always kind of written by the victor. So of course we look at like the Texas Rangers as like the most badass dudes at the time and everything else. And it's like, well, there's a lot of other factors that go into play. And when you talk about history and the way it was written, especially when we talk about battles, and oftentimes you're not going to get both sides of the story. And what I like to try to tell people, even if it's just a common argument, if me and you have a disagreement about something, there's three sides to every story. And there's my side, there's your side, and there's probably the truth that lies in the middle of both of our stories somewhere, So I think that part is hard when you talk about indigenous people and indigenous cultures. throughout the world, just because we have this very modern Westernization mindset of things we've been taught. And you know, an example is like Christopher Columbus. You know, like if you're our age, you learn that Christopher Columbus in school like found America and was this great explorer and all this other shit. And then the reality is, it's like, no, he found the Caribbean. He never came to America. He was, you know, this horrible person. He was a slave driver and just really, you know, and found like his conquest and what he found was people. So like that was his way of making money, was to sell people. So I mean, you don't learn those things in school. You know, and that's just kind of an example of a lot of people nowadays really kind of finding that out and being like, wait, what do you mean? I read Christopher Columbus's diary, and you're like, oh yeah, you read one side of the story. Did you learn about the Taino people and what they say what happened? So there's a lot that goes into history, I think, and it's easy to kind of, you know, gloss over at times, if you will.
Yeah, I think so. And I remember in the history books growing up, you know, talking about the westward expansion, and it's looking back on it now, it's funny how they they took the white culture and made them look as noble and heroic as possible.
Yeah.
And then they also tried to play that line with the Indians as well. Like they highlighted how savage they were without highlighting how savage we were. And then and it's just like, yeah, there's like Daniele Bolelli does some really good work on his podcast on Crazy Horse, and then even in the books like you know, Empire, the
Summer Moon,
yeah, and some of the stories that were told in there about just how brutal those people could be, and but then you think about like just the systematic destruction of the buffalo herd perpetrated by the federal government, and you're just like, now you're playing like Russia style tactics where you just siege them out and just slowly over time just starve them out. And that's really what happened to the native peoples. You know, first it was the disease and destruction, then it was the vast increases in technology, and then just the overwhelming size and suffocation and starvation of the natives.
Oh yeah, it was, you know, when you look at all of that, it's way more complex than what we tend to think it is. And here's an example, especially when you talk about like Western culture, start talking about cowboys and stuff, right? And when you look at the vaquero and like what was a vaquero and how did they start? I mean, it's like, well, they were a bunch of mixed breed kind of nomad guys. They were, you know, some of them were natives, some of them were Spaniards, some of them were white guys. I mean, they basically, even when you look up the term, you look at the history of the vaquero, that's exactly what they were. They were, you know, native people who were kind of inculcated into Spanish way of life. Mm-hmm. And then the lowest man on the totem pole, like no one wants to be on a horse working cows. Like it's hard work. So it was more of kind of a, you know, the original like blue collar, you know, bottom shelf job you could get.
Literally a peon job.
Oh, 100%. And when you look at it, it's like, I think oftentimes in our culture, because of, you know, movies in the early 1940s to like the 70s, they didn't show, you know, a guy that was like half black and half white that was a cowboy. And like the reality of it was, you know, there was a lot of black cowboys, there was a lot of mixed breed guys, there was a lot, it really became, and when you look at like the modern cowboy as how it developed, you look at people like the Comancheros who were basically just that. They were kind of outcasts and a little bit of outlaw, but at the same time, you know, they were just, you know, cowboys who were trying to look for work and kind of develop into that. And I think that that's a good example of showing people, you know, that history isn't exactly what we think it is. And Hollywood has done a really good job of taking, you know, the last 4 or 5 generations of people and really taking your mind to a different place. So a lot of people think of cowboys as this white guy out on a ranch, and people like me and you, we know, like we work with, native guys, black guys, white guys, Mexican guys, like, and you see that. So,
it's a real
and
real
women too.
pot.
Oh, for sure. And I think that oftentimes that's kind of, that's something that's like kind of a story that's not told. And that's just an easy example for me that I like to share with people, because a lot of people are interested in it. And a lot of the old, especially the old Cowboys, they know why they rope a certain way or why things are called something, and they understand that, and I think that's really cool. Part of American history that isn't really told as well. And then, like I said, Hollywood, especially when you look at the 60s and the 50s and 60s and all that kind of stuff, it was very like everyone's white in the whole, the whole cast. And, it was just kind of, I think that was able to steer people in a different way on their thought process or what they think of as an American cowboy.
Yeah. And like, piggybacking on that point, like I've always heard how the military is literally just a cross section of America when you get thrown in. And I was eye test away from going into the Marines, and it just I've heard story after story of guys like you, and just how like some of your best friends are black or native or Mexican or whatever. It just so happens to be like who you were in that unit with, who had your back. And,
yeah, absolutely.
And it's kind of the same way in cowboy culture too. And it's it's a dangerous job at the end of the day. There's shit can happen. Luckily on my end, I don't have bullets coming at me. That's a handy deal. But whereas your former line of work, it was very much the same thing, but it breeds a type of person where like when you joke around, everything is on the table. Like race is on the table, your mother is on the table, and
absolutely.
You like it comes like you have a hard time relating to regular folks because you do live on that fringe of society.
Yeah, absolutely. I think any job field, whether that's oil workers or cowboys or anything that where death is always very present and part of what you do, I think that yields a different kind of humor, a different kind of respect for each other. And that was my favorite thing about the Army, and was all walks of life coming together to accomplish a common goal. Like no one cares your color, creed, religion, none of that. And even today, as much as society tries to push us into this sexual orientation and all this crazy stuff, like at the end of the day, if you got a gay dude and he's an awesome cowboy or he's an awesome soldier, we're going to tell gay jokes, but no one cares. As long as you're like, bro, don't whip it out on me. Like I'm not, but at the same time, like I think that a lot of people, society lets us try to put us in these boxes, and the military and jobs where death is always present is one of the few places left that push aside those boxes and doesn't allow you to be that way. And you're just like, look, man, I don't care if you're Muslim and you're purple. If you're good at your job and you got my back, I got your back, because that's what we do. We take care of each other. And I really, that was my favorite thing about being in the Army.
Yeah. Those are some like my just favorite, like especially podcasts. Like I always like listening to Evan Hafer talk. I don't know if you ever worked with him in the military, but I know you guys have that same type of background, and the guy's just no bullshit. Like he's hilarious, and he's he's like superhuman work ethic. Just looking what they've done over there at Black Rifle.
Yeah.
And but at the same time, he's down to earth and no bullshit. Like I got to visit with him for an hour, and like I could talk to that guy for hours and just pick his brain, and a lot of that comes just through working with guys like you or some of the the cowboys that I've met over the years. It's that same, like you learn so much from people like that.
Yeah, I think it's and speaking of Evan, I met him in Montana, and we have a lot of mutual friends, and kind of in the same circle. but I think it just goes back to just the jobs, and what we do for a living. It's you got to have that kind of mindset, and I look at it as a lot of times people, they just blow up on things that aren't really that serious. And when you've been around something where when bullets are flying and people are dying, or horses are rolling over and you're airlifting your buddy out in the middle of a ranch, like those are things that are experiences that we share and we understand. So oftentimes the small things in life, you're like, why are we being so serious? Let's just have fun, laugh about stuff, and go on with our day, versus someone who doesn't live that way of life or has never experienced that. They really freak out when something small happens or doesn't go their way, or their favorite caramel macchiato is not at Starbucks, or whatever the case is, versus somebody else that's just used to very serious situations that are life and death. You tend to brush things off in a different manner than a lot of other people do.
Well, yeah, and like and cowboying in particular, there's always the fun part where you got a rope or something busts into and you got to cover them. But a good chunk of cowboying is a lot of boredom, just a ton of boredom. And and I hear it from the military guys all the time: hurry up and wait, hurry up and wait. That's the motto of the military.
I get guys all the time. People will be like, hey, post more cowboy shit on social media. And it makes me laugh, because I'm like, well, here's the deal, man. I don't have a professional photographer following me around, or a drone or anything like that. And I need two hands. The other thing is most 90% of the shit I do is not worth, like, what do you want to see me do? Driving a skid steer, unloading something, or pounding fence posts. Like it's not as glorious as people think it is. And my favorite thing about the cowboy world and that job is, and how it relates to the military, is there's a lot of similarities there. A lot of similarities where when you're in the military, you're taking care of your guys, you're taking care of your soldiers. Same when you're a cowboy, you're taking care of your animals, you're taking care of your horses. You're the last person to eat at the end of the day. And I think a lot of people don't understand those similarities. And there are often times where it's not as cool as you think it is. There's a lot of mission planning. There's a lot of times we're sitting around preparing, checking gear, really fine tuning everything. Maybe a week's worth of planning and preparation go into a 6-hour mission. And it's very similar when you're looking at like operations, where you're like, all right, well, we have a lot of planning and details that go into being able to get, 1,000 calves branded. And I don't think a lot of people understand that aspect of it. They just see the guys roping and the coolness and the stuff that you can kind of see on social media. And the other thing I really like about the two is you can't fake the funk. Like you can run your mouth all you want about how good you can shoot, or how good of an operator you are, or how good a shape you're in, or whatever. Same thing with cowboy deal, but at the same time, we're gonna find out real quick who's about that action and who isn't. And that's another one of my favorite things about the similarities in the two worlds.
Yeah, it's when the rope comes tight, there's no bullshit. I mean, and I'm sure that's the same thing was like when that first shot is fired, like, whatever planning you may have, like how good are you right now? Because it's all a plan until shit happens. It could be the sickest calf you've ever seen, and as soon as that rope comes tight, blah, and it comes to life. And you're just like, this is not how I thought it would go. You have to act on the fly, and that's it. You know real quick how good somebody is, or how much they've done. But I mean, just as simple as like, hey, come pick up heels, and they're like, okay, and you're like, fuck, now I'm just gonna have to lay this calf down on my own. And you're just like, all right, well. If you would have just told me from the get-go, and I'm sure it's just the same way in the military. You just like, you can't fake that shit.
No, and you know, I spent 22 years in the Army, so I've had a huge gaps of where, at times I'd be on leave and I could help out on a ranch, or maybe I was stationed near something and I could kind of go help out. But I think the Army taught me, especially being in special forces and being a Green Beret, there's two kind of guys, and you can kind of have that attitude where you're good at everything and you know everything. But at the same time, no one wants to be around that guy. You don't have any humbleness, and you could even be really good, right? But sometimes that cockiness is just too overbearing. And I really like the humility. I love being around people who are willing to say, "I don't know how to do that," and that's something that I have like learned. It took me a while to be that person, but I learned that in the military, and I've just had phenomenal experiences learning this trade craft as a cowboy from people, because, I get way more respect when I say, "Hey, I don't know how to do that." Or they're like, "Hey, do you know how to do this?" I'm like, "No, can you show me?" Or, "I'm not that good at it. Show me a couple of times. Let me practice."
Yeah.
Or tell me exactly what you want me to do and I'll execute that way. Versus guys who were like, "Oh no, yeah, I know how to do that. I can do that. And then just what you said, now you're in a situation where you're like, "Okay, bud, like you clearly don't. Now I have to fucking do it." And now it's a train wreck, and it could get, and the problem that arises, what sucks is it's dangerous work, and if you're not willing to say, "I don't know how to do something," so I really enjoy being around that, and I've been blessed with being around a lot of old cowboys and guys that that are kind of came from that very old school mentality that way, versus a lot of the younger guys and such seem to me that term like super puncher, everything's fast. They want to ride it, everything fast, and everything's like, and you're like, "Dude, slow down, bud, slow down."
Yeah, slow is fast when it comes with cows, and and even with horses too. It's it's why the good bridle horses take years upon years to make a good bridle horse. But then there's also, and there's that's the type of horsemanship that anybody can appreciate. But I also like to. There's also stuff where you got to get done now. Like I don't have years to spend on this horse. I got months, so like I need them up to speed quick. And so there's a lot of give and take within. I mean it's a lot like the military too. Just you have like
you're drinking from a fire hose. You don't have no choice.
Yeah, and then but you have like your special forces guys like where you're doing some weird shit a lot of times. And then like your conventional military guys, like their day is boring as fuck until like shit pops off. Like I mean you're just I mean I don't know what you do most of the time, but like where you guys are planning for stuff that's a lot of times off the books. You're always like you said 6 months of training for for a 6-hour mission.
Yeah, and there's a lot of similarities between the regular military and special forces, but at the same time, one of the things that we do in special operations in general, and then in special forces in particular, is the training so long. It's such a rigorous selection process, and it takes about 2 years to become a Green Beret. But with that, we don't have a micromanaging system. We don't have 3 or 4 layers of leadership. So it's one of those things where it's like, hey, if you need a job to get done, I'm just going to direct you or tell you what the end state is, and that's it. However you get there is on you. And it's way more, it's really big boy rules. So I think that part allows us to operate more effectively. But at the same time, it does give guys, enough rope to hang themselves. And there are guys that, kind of get in trouble or in over their head. But I think there's a lot of similarities between the regular Army, but the biggest one is we're big boy rules. You're not always going to get told how to do something. You just get told what the mission statement is. or the in-state, the commander's intent, what they want done, and how you accomplish that is on your own. So that's a really cool thing about special forces, and one of my favorite things that I like.
Now, so how did you guys develop your tactics? I know without going like too far into it, but like I know that the special operations community has basically I say stolen, and I mean that in the best way. It's like, no,
Right.
we're stealing your best tactics as the native people on in particularly like raiding. Just like
Yeah.
you hit hard, you hit fast, and then you disperse.
Yeah, I would say, some of the biggest tactics that we've taken away from native culture is scouting and reconnaissance and survivability. And if you go, so a little bit of history. If you go back to King Philip's War, and I believe it was like 1676 or something, the colonialists or the Pilgrims were fighting the Wampanoag, and their allies were the Mohegan and I forget the other, and I think the Pequot. And they developed, so in their army that they developed, the Mohegan and the Pequot were basically their special operations guys. They were their special forces. So that's what's technically recognized as the first United States special forces or special operations unit is during King Philip's War. And the reason why was because if you just look at how they fought back in the day, guys are lining up on each side, and it's a lot of hand to hand, even though you have muskets and whatnot. But the natives were the best at, kind of sneaking around, getting reconnaissance. If you were marching in a convoy or walking down a trail trying to get from point A to point B or moving supplies, they were really good at, 2 or 3 guys kind of hitting that or sabotaging things in the middle of the night. Those kind of tactics, all of that.
I hated those tactics too. I absolutely despised it. They thought it as cowardly, and because you weren't standing up right across from somebody and letting them try to shoot you.
Yeah, it's so dumb. It's like, well, it's different. We don't have swords anymore, so why are we doing this way? This is really stupid.
There's a lot of people unnecessarily.
And you just look at warfare in general, and a lot of times those unconventional tactics and that guerrilla warfare style is what dominated on the battlefield or turn major events. Like you look at the Romans and how they failed for the barbarians, and you look at those wars, and it was like, because they trapped them into the mountains. They lured them into walking down marching down a certain trail. And then the barbarians were able to basically just kind of take them apart in the mountains and using tactics that the Romans weren't privy to. So they weren't able to get in their phalanxes, and they weren't able to line up and do what they did and create this, this war machine. They had to fight in these very unconventional ways. And when you just look at that in general, you look at like the Mongols, one of the ways they were able to advance so fast on the Chinese was obviously the horse. But what a lot of people don't know about them is, they were amazing horsemen, really good with bows, but they ate their horses. They used the mare's milk. And it was just like this amazing platform for them that was very unconventional to other armies that needed rice and meat and these big supply lines to feed them. Whereas the Mongols, they didn't need that. They were able to have this very unconventional method of traveling and fighting and sustaining themselves. So I think that those, as you look just through history, there's a lot of pieces in there that really show you how oftentimes that unconventional warfare side of things really turns the battlefield. And that goes all the way up into, current engagements and conflicts now.
Yeah. Do you know anybody over in Ukraine right now?
Yeah, I do. I have a lot of buddies over there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that shit's
well, the thing that
testy.
It is. I think the thing that bothers me a little bit, and this is just because of my time, fighting, and on 3 different continents. It's like, well, we don't, I get it. Russia and Putin, they have nuclear weapons. So we are looking at this in a different light. But one thing we're letting it do is we're letting the same old thing that politicians and some of the great generals have been saying since we started our country, is we're letting old white men tell us what to do that will never fight. We're letting people like Mitt Romney, who dodged the draft and didn't go to Vietnam, basically,
oil interests in Ukraine.
Oh, 100%. They all have money ties. It's the industrial military complex. But my problem is like, well, what's the difference between Syria? What's the difference with Yemen? 54 million people have been killed in Africa over the last 10 years. So it's not a moral stance. They're trying to fool the American public into thinking that this is like a moral stance on what we need to do with Ukraine. But again, there's three sides to every story. And if Russia would put nuclear weapons and ballistic weapons in Mexico, you don't think we wouldn't invade Mexico?
Right.
So I think that a lot of times we're just blinded by the media and what they want us to see. And ultimately, everyone is corrupt. I hate all politicians, by the way. They're all about money, and
says Dan Hall.
They all are.
Yeah, it's amazing if you try to point out how Ukraine's a bunch of assholes too in this situation, that then you get called a Putin apologist. And no, that guy's a fucking asshole too. And I don't see us needing to get further involved in a fight between two assholes. And and also, like you said, we also kind of help kick off that fight through 2 decades of just slowly creeping towards
a lot of people don't understand NATO and the Russians, and it's one of those things where look at oil, it's all money, follow the money. It's like, Look at Germany, are you serious? Come on, man, follow the money.
Right. And I've said before, one thing that's really flew under the radar is how much Germany's gonna pour into their military. And last time Germany had a super powerful military, didn't end good for a lot of people.
No, not at all.
But
go
ahead.
Go ahead. No. I was going to say, going back to kind of the history of special forces, or special operations. I'm not sure how it grew from King Philip's War up until about when you really look at the tactics used with the natives when they raided and how they conducted things. But special forces, the cross arrows is from the Apache Scouts. So that was where we get our identification from the Apache Scouts. And that was kind of really where after the Indian Wars, you kind of look at Geronimo's time frame. Once all that stuff was over, was really when the military realized how valuable everything was, and their tactics were. They definitely used scouts and stuff throughout the Indian Wars, but when you just look at how it developed from there, and as you go into modern warfare from World War I and World War II, there were very elite units established and based around the native tactics, to include actual native units like the Alamo Scouts in World War II. And even when you look at the OSS, which is basically, if you've seen the movie Inglourious Bastards, it's loosely based on members of the OSS.
Yeah,
exactly. So from after World War II is when you have a branch of when they branch off between CIA and Special Forces.
Right.
And then in the South Pacific, you have the Alamo Scouts, and those were actually, the unit was comprised of mostly natives and cowboys and mountain men, just guys who knew how to live off the land, because they specifically wanted those skill sets of being able to go into the jungle, do long range reconnaissance for weeks on end and not need anything. And frankly, you just couldn't take city boys and teach them to do that in such a short period of time. And they already had a lot of natives that were hunting, living on the land, living on their reservations, still very inculcated in, and you're also talking in World War II, you're talking one generation away from fighting in Indian wars, so your father or your grandfathers were fighting in Indian wars and had this still really carried on that warrior mindset.
Yeah. I was gonna say, if you look at all of like the most effective U.S. military leaders in the Indian Wars, they heavily relied on friendly Indian tribes. Like Kit Carson, you could say like his unit back in the day was a special forces unit, because that's exactly right. They would go out on these long reconnaissance missions. Kit Carson was a fan of the mule, famously, rather over horses because of their durability, and and he was quick to fight an Indian when it came to fight, but he was like, hey, let's talk, and he had just dozens of of scouts that he trusted, that he used constantly.
Yeah, I think so. There's a saying I like to use, especially when we start talking about American history, in particular, natives versus Western expansion or colonialism, and it's one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
And Geronimo's last words when he died, he actually said, "I wish I killed more Mexicans." He hated Mexicans, and it's one of those things where it's like, did the cavalry, play games like stacking babies on sabers? Yes. Did Geronimo stack Mexican kids on a pike? Yes.
Yep.
And there's I'm not saying that anything is right, but when you look at war, when you look at how do you create fear and despair in people to fear in their enemy, it goes back since Cain and Abel, and it's everyone fought this way, whether it's the Mongols or the Vikings or the barbarians or the Romans, everyone would try to institute fear into their enemies. And a lot of times the way you would do that was by very brutal means, of whether that's torture or how you're killing people. And I think that saying goes a long ways. And it even is I can even give you, tangible things I've seen on the battlefield, like in Afghanistan, that, just kind of proves that, it's one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, or vice versa. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. But one of the things is, with Kit Carson's a good analogy and a good person. If you read some of this stuff or, about him, he's one of those guys where I look at it's like, soldiers take orders from people, and they often don't. Oftentimes we remove every kind of moral clause out of your mind or what we look at people. But when you look at what they did to the Navajo, there's a lot of his writings and stuff where he started this thing and he thought it was going to be way different than it was, about, bringing Navajo people to their land, to the new reservation they gave them. And it was way more brutal and horrible, and he wanted no part of it. And he actually talks about it a lot, very openly, how much it hurt his heart and how he felt, because he really did like these people. And I think that's a good example of kind of like someone taking orders, you're executing a task, but then you kind of have this moral clause and a moral lens in there. And he does a very good job for anybody who's interested in, kind of learning about Kit Carson and that. The other thing I really like that you mentioned Kit Carson was he tells a story about when the cavalry, when they were trying to fight the Californios, and it was the first time they rolled up on all these guys, and they were kind of hanging out by the fire in their serapes, just hanging out. And they thought they were going to jump a bunch of these Californios and just smash them real fast. And he talks about how he's never seen anyone on a horse maneuver their horses and use a lasso and a lance that way. And they basically, like, I don't know how big the element was, but it was only a couple, it was like 50 or 60 Californios, Cowboys, just destroyed like 200 cavalrymen because they would just rope them. And he was like this, the lasso was like an extension of their hand, and it was ridiculous. So he ended up jumping off his mule and running up into the rocks and just trying to shoot him with his musket. He's like, I don't want no part of this down there.
He went to native tactics real quick. Just
he did.
Back behind cover, And,
yeah, exactly.
It's I think that was the Battle of San Pasqual. I know that because I did an episode on that after what's the name of that book?
Thunder or something.
Yeah. So,
I forget the name of it, but it's a really good book. It kind of journals his life and talks about Kit Carson.
And he married Indian women, and he was very like in touch with, like he was very much an American, but he was also very in touch with the Indian culture, and there was like a lot of internal clash between him, within himself, and he was incredible figure. I mean, that guy was he was something else.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes a lot of history is lost, and I think it just goes back to kind of what we've learned in school and also movies. But one of the things I like to remind people of is the Spaniards, when they showed up, they marched from Guatemala to Canada and then from Guatemala to Chile. And when you rewind a little bit in history, oftentimes people want to make this like a red versus white thing. The same with like Thanksgiving. You'll kind of see a lot of people talk about that, and with King Philip's War. And it's like, well, is it really red versus white if the Mohican and the Pequot fought with the Pilgrims? So it's not as cut and dry as we like to make everything seem. It's not as divisive as people want us to believe. But when we go back to the Spaniards and you look at the Spaniards, it's like, okay, well, in 700 AD or around that time, they were conquered by the Moors. The Moors are from Africa, so you can see what they look like, right? They didn't bring any women. So even now, this current day and age, Spaniards and Portuguese and Italians, it's like, why are they darker skinned? Why do they have like black facial hair and a lot of things and it's like, well, because the Moors didn't bring any women and they conquered them. Yeah. And then you fast forward to the conquistadors landing and then fighting the Aztecs and doing all that stuff. A lot of people, in my opinion, think of this like white European conquering and conquesting. And it was like, well, maybe the officers might have been kind of a white European looking man, but the actual soldiers and the conquistadors who fought were guys who looked like me and my brothers. They were a very mixed breed looking person. You kind of fast forward to that. And I think American history, we remove that a lot because we automatically go into like this U.S. versus Mexico, at the Alamo. We look at a lot of things in that manner versus really understanding what happened before Western expansion and the Louisiana Purchase and all this other stuff where it's like, we had a lot of mountain men that were inculcated and lived and loved Native people. And there is a turn there when it comes to respect for the land and kind of over hunting and over trapping. And those were some of the reasons why, like certain tribes were more aggressive towards trappers and mountain men, when you're looking at the early 1800s. But then
always over resources, ain't it?
It does seem that way a lot of times, and I would add, power is like a resource, and I think that part is often missing. And it is really good to hear stories from different cultures, different walks of life that lived in that era to really see what their mind. And I think that anybody who hasn't, kind of studied Kit Carson or read some of his stuff, he's a really good example of that, of a guy who, in my opinion, really lived had a lot of more morality in him. He really understood and lived that, the colors of the medicine wheel, if you will, all walks of life coming together to accomplish a common goal. And you might not agree with this common goal, but I think he did a very good job of trying to protect people in general on both sides of what may have been his enemy or what may have been his ally. He did a very good job of that. So I do refer to Kit Carson a lot and through history, and we'll tell people, check out Kit Carson. And I have a lot of Native friends that are kind of opposite side of the spectrum, and I understand that are, what I mean by that is like, you're on stolen land and have this huge feeling of what happened. But at the same time, the warriors I know, they understand what it was. We know why, why did the Comanche hate the Apache? Why did the Apache raid the Navajos? Why did Hopis and Pueblos live the way they lived in dwellings? And it was always a warring, clashing societies before Spaniards showed up, before, Europeans started the westward expansion. It's a lot more complex than just red versus white when we talk about Western expansion and we talk about what goes on. Now, if you fast forward to today, I understand that sentiment. I understand that from living on an Indian reservation, from being there and really working with the Native community. I understand that. And one thing I try to explain to a lot of Americans is the direction our country is going when they take your rights away and they put restrictions on you and all these things. I'm like, well, we did that before. We killed all the buffalo and stripped away an entire means of life to people. And then we put them on land that won't grow shit, where there's no jobs, where there's nothing. We take their identity away. We make them live in a certain way on commodity foods and government dependence. And you fast forward 150 years and you have the problems we have today on Indian reservations. And I'd like to kind of share that with people, because it's like, well, the tiny little infringements that the government's constantly trying to do to you, and the government overreach, what they want is they want all of us to live in that kind of environment. And you look at it now and you're around Indian reservations, like there ain't no jobs there. There's Amazon ain't pulling up to Crowheart, Wyoming and opening up a warehouse.
No.
And that's just how it is. Which really, it's frustrating and it sucks, and it does create more division when we do talk about this red versus white, or red versus,
It's
America,
the same
if you will.
thing with the inner cities too, and like
Absolutely.
I think kind of a parallel figure to Kit Carson is Jefferson, where he was very much involved in the slave trade, but at the same time he hated it. He had sex with his slaves, had kids with them. He tried to abolish slavery, or he tried to free his slave, but he was bound by law at the time to not be able to free any of his slaves, and it was just a moral quandary. But it's the same thing. You look back at the New Deal, and I guess it's even kind of before the New Deal, but Roosevelt made a deal. I guess, yeah, it was a New Deal with some sort of heavy subsidy towards the black community to get them on board with these New Deal policies. And the black community's been on the government tit ever since. And you look at like Baltimore and South Side of Chicago and Oakland and on all these inner cities, and that's why they turn to gangs and shit, because there's no other option.
Right. They're longing for a tribe, a sense of community. And unfortunately, like you said, it's, you can go back to like Black Wall Street in Oklahoma and what happened there. And you look at these thriving communities, and I know that race has nothing to do with it. I know that some people will try to interject a lot of race in here, and I'm not saying that, let me explain myself. I'm not saying that there wasn't racial intentions with all this, 60, 70 years ago, or even 200 years ago for that matter. But what's really happened now is when you look at these cities and it's like, well, why has it not changed in 60 years? Why are we electing people and officials? Almost the entire police force is black. The mayors and the governors and everyone there are black. And it's like, okay, well, now we still can't inject it's racial thing anymore. The problem is we're not creating, one is jobs, really. Like there's no jobs there. And this goes with, I look at America as not being a super racist place. I understand there's some racism with people. I'm not saying there isn't. I've dealt with it myself, but it's really socioeconomic standing, whether that's the Rust Belt in Ohio, or, West Virginia, or inner cities. or Indian reservations, they all share a common thing, and that is there's no jobs, there's nothing for them to do. They are, they do create these government subsidies and these programs, where the reality is, most of these people they don't want that. That's not what they want, But again, it's like, well, Amazon, where are you putting your new facilities at? Well, it's not in Baltimore City, Maryland. It's in, the suburbs somewhere in a nice upper middle class area. So I think that a lot of that is more of economic standing. And just like you said, and you can really see those in inner cities, Indian reservations, and rural areas.
Yeah, I mean, and they all have one thing in common, and it's no jobs and drug use. Like it's that's
and you look at the opioid, like the fentanyl. The fentanyl is, oh man, that's a whole nother thing. And some of the work I do, is definitely fentanyl it's affecting communities, especially poor communities, on a drastic level.
Yeah, it's that shit's rough. It's oh man, we could go on for hours about that war on drugs stuff and how much it has caused like current like the border crisis. That's almost all even war on drugs.
100%. Even going back to the Black community, you look at like the 80s and Ronald Reagan, and if you were caught with a little bit of crack cocaine, you would get 15 years in prison. But if you were a white guy who was just doing cocaine, you got a ticket or 6 months in prison or something. Versus and there's a lot of fuckery that went on with that we're still trying to. We basically created a system,
Joe Biden connection there. I mean,
there is. But in 1996, that was what made me laugh, during the election. And I, to be clear, I don't like any politicians, and if I had to, vote for one, I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Both these dudes are idiots. But it was funny that they elected the biggest establishment candidate that's ever lived, and somebody that was so anti and clearly racist, with racist intentions, especially in the 90s when he did that bill with Bill Clinton, and
the super predators, as Hillary.
Yeah, and I'm not knocking people from the South because I'm from Montana and the West, but like I didn't really realize how much racism was in our country until I went into the Army and traveled to the South.
Yeah.
Can you give me a second? I gotta take a leak, and I gotta tell these kids to shut up.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I'm the same.
All right, sweet. All right, sorry about that, dude. I was trying to hold it. I was like, oh man, my kids are being loud. I'm like, be quiet.
No, it's all good. Let's say I feel like we should do this as a series, like do multi-part, because I kind of got to go check on kids, so we probably better wrap here soon. But we haven't even hardly got started, Like I feel like
no worries. I can do talk about War Party Movement a little bit if you want.
I was gonna say let's do that. So because I really wanted you to be able to highlight what you got going on there and the problem behind it,
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess a lot of people don't know, but there's a ton of Native girls that just go missing, disappear off the res, and War Party Movement as something that you're involved with to help combat that.
Yeah, so I started War Party Movement last July, and really it kind of started from my mother. Growing up as a kid, my mom would always trying to help Native women, and we're always going to somebody's house and take them to a church or a shelter or something, and just through the years, this problem just progressed worse and worse and worse, and there's a lot of issues and reasons why Native women do go missing. A lot of it's kind of access and placement, especially in the West, because they're in such rural areas. They're kind of easy to abduct. There's a lot of things as a predator that would like to have They're also very sought after in like the sex trafficking world. Just a Native woman, Native American woman. But there's just a lot of problems, and it goes back to where there's poverty, there's sex trafficking, there's human trafficking, and that's inner city to rural America. That's very common what you see there. There's a lot of statistics when it comes to Native women, and one of the biggest things, it's like in 2016 there was over 5,000 missing or murdered Indigenous women, and only 116 of those cases have been logged by the DOJ. So there's a lot of issues when it comes to law enforcement talking with each other, local sheriff's department, tribal police. There's a lot of issues there, that tend to make this problem even harder to help control or help combat. So there's a lot of grassroots efforts from organizations or companies like myself. And basically what War Party Movement is, it's just a t-shirt company. It's just an apparel company. And what I do with the money is I use that to support my efforts in helping families search for missing people. A lot of the times I can't exactly tell a lot of stories about what I do because these women, our lives are in danger, and recently, I kind of share a little bit of a story that happened recently without trying to give too much detail. We had a woman, I can't even say the state because you'd be able to narrow it down, but we had a woman who was on the run. She was going to testify in a missing, murdered Indigenous woman case that was actually her niece. And the people involved attempted multiple attempts on her life. They actually killed her boyfriend in front of her. She went on the run. We were able to, kind of bring her into our system, get her to a safe house. And now she's actually at a recovery center because she was, an addict. But, those are the kind of things that I do. And really trying to, change people's lives, and help these families and help these people. So that's where the money goes when someone buys apparel. The next chapter of what I'm doing, I'm really excited about it. I'm about 90% done. By the time this podcast comes out on your main site, I'll have everything up. But I started a nonprofit arm of War Party Movement called War Party Ranch. And the short story of that is, this is, for lack of better terms, a cowgirl course for female survivors of abuse. So what we'll be doing is we'll be bringing women out to the ranch for a 6-week course. And then when they graduate, we'll be getting them jobs on ranches or with outfitters around the country. So the dream there is to, let's say a woman in Arizona, regardless of race, but a woman in Arizona, she's in an abusive relationship or needs to get out of the situation she's in. We can bring her up to Colorado to the ranch for 6 weeks, teach her a skill set, and then get her a job with like a ranch in Nevada or an outfitter in Wyoming. Yeah. And really just remove her from that situation. So that's the next chapter of where we're going with all of this.
That's pretty incredible, man. That's awesome. So, I know like we've talked several times about how, like how big of an issue is that is on the reservations in particular, and just how little attention is paid to it. When we're too busy worried about who Will Smith is going to slap next.
Man, I know, right?
And we all get caught up in it, but it's I thought that it's a very worthwhile cause, and not having a huge audience, just being able to get it out to as many people as I can.
Yeah, absolutely. I look at your audience too as people who can really help and be influential in that, because a lot of your audience lives in rural areas. They live in places that they do have, members of the Native community live with them, or they're close to Indian reservations. And here's one thing a lot of people don't know. Because of the sovereignty of Indian reservations, the state of Wyoming, the governor of Wyoming, did a really good job of putting together a plan to bring in the tribal police with the local sheriff's department and be able to share a lot of things. A lot of other states have not done that, which makes things difficult. But here's one thing. Amber Alert or Silver Alert, for instance. Most people, if you're traveling through Arizona and a little kid goes missing in in Tucson, you're going to get an alert for little Bobby who's missing and the car, but you get all that straight to your cell phone regardless of your network. Now, if that happens on the Navajo reservation, you won't get an alert because their Amber Alert system is completely separate from a national Amber Alert system. They actually just incorporated an Amber Alert system on the Navajo reservation. However, if you are not part of the reservation, physically living on the Indian reservation, you cannot be a part of this alert system. So meaning if you don't live on the Navajo res and you are not a resident there, your phone will not be pinged when Melissa Thunderbird goes missing on the Navajo reservation. So you could be driving through Arizona out by Flagstaff, and you will never know that the car that just passed you was a car that was on an Amber Alert on the Navajo reservation, the way you would if it was little Bobby Johnson missing from Flagstaff. So there's a lot of problems that happen in there, a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of red tape, all these government organizations. And for me, it's just another story to tell people that like the government does not have your best interest at play.
No.
You know, and all these, you know, working with the BIA and the FBI and all these different organizations I work with all the time, it is beyond frustrating. And this is why a lot of, you know, there's a lot of grassroots efforts, a lot of just, you know, search and rescue volunteers, you know, close to Indian reservations who will just put a call out and say, hey, there's a missing person. Will you guys help me? And a lot of it's just volunteer work versus, you know, an actual structured organization from the BIA or somebody getting involved. And this is why I am doing this transition. It's part of the reasons why I'm doing this transition with a nonprofit. The other reason why was I'm tied to a lot of really awesome veteran organizations that do great work. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to sound like I'm knocking them in any way. But a lot of them don't take women. And it was kind of frustrating to me, you know, and you work on ranches, you know, sometimes the handiest person out there is the 18-year-old girl, right? And and that's been doing it since she was 3. And it's like, even in special operations, you know, we have female operators and that work in a completely different capacity than a lot of people would even understand. But I look at it, it's like, you know, these female veterans, these people are hurting as well. So I wanted to start something that would assist that community and teach them a really cool skill set and not always be this, you know, like a boys club, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. And, knocking on the door. So
no worries at all.
Better get, but man, I enjoyed the shit out of this, and let's plan on doing another one here soon. We'll do a multi-parter because I
sounds good, brother.
I think we can. Yeah, we got a lot to talk about, I think.
Yeah, heck yeah. Well, take care, brother. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, for sure. Where can they find all your stuff on social media?
So warpartymovement.com and on Instagram, just War Party Movement. And then my personal Instagram is Jeremiah Blackbeard.
All right, cool. Well, thanks again, man. I appreciate the hell out of you. And everybody else, move your ass. We're burning down.
Take it easy, brother.
Take care.
Up in the morning beneath the stars so bright, pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. You'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Burning daylight. Well, life is just a gather, and you won't catch 'em all. But when you ride through the gate, make sure you sit up tall. I can see the horizon, it's looking pretty bright. Well, get your ass moving, son, you're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the south till the job's done right. Burning daylight.